No one in that gold-trimmed room had any idea that a single woman descending the staircase was about to shake a multi-billion-dollar tech empire to its core, and even fewer realized that the first shock of the night would not come from the stage, but from the contemptuous looks of people who believed themselves untouchable. The Sterling Crown Gala, where crystal glasses chimed like declarations from the elite, glowed under lights that shimmered as if forged from molten gold. The vast room was filled with the scent of aged wine elite perfume and the unmistakable aroma of ambition and arrogance from people convinced that power clung to their skin like a divine seal. And then she appeared. Madison Cole, 38 years old, CEO of Cole and Finch Capital, a name most people in that room had only ever seen in financial reports, but had never recognized in real life. Her emerald satin gown flowed with each step smooth as running water beneath the crystal light. Her hair was neatly pinned, her shoulders straight, her face composed, her eyes sharp enough to slice through every polished social mask around her. Yet beneath that steady exterior, no one saw her heartbeat slow the way the body prepares itself for the scrutiny, judgment, and skepticism she had endured for years, the kind reserved for someone like her. A woman of color, daring to walk into a territory dominated by faces convinced the world was built for them. As her heel touched the first step, the entire room hesitated for a single beat. Not because of her presence, but because they did not believe she belonged there. Eyes lifted toward her, not curious, but irritated, surprised, and vaguely offended. A quiet scoff escaped from a group of businessmen near the bar. A woman draped in fur scanned Madison from head to toe, then leaned to whisper in her friend's ear with the expression of someone spotting an unwelcome stain. But Madison did not falter. Every step she took down the staircase felt like a declaration of the place she had carved for herself, in a world she fought to enter, not through privilege, but through grit and ability no one could quantify. The room grew so silent that even the cello in the corner seemed to lose its rhythm. It was not respect. It was doubt, judgment, anticipation for her to misstep. Madison felt every one of those things clearly, sharply, but her posture remained unshaken, her gaze steady like a midnight lake untouched by wind. She had seen this all her life, from boardrooms where men flipped through her documents only to ask if she was sure she was in the right room, to elegant events where the first person to greet her was a server, assuming she was a colleague. The Sterling Crown could not shake her. But 3 seconds later, a shrill voice cut through the air like a knife dragged across crystal. Oh my goodness, who let the staff wander onto the main floor? The voice sliced the atmosphere apart. It belonged to Victoria Hale, 43 years old, hostess of the Gala and CEO of Hale Technologies, a woman gilded from her champagne satin dress to the pride stitched into every step she took. Laughter erupted around her, first stifled, then bolder like embers, suddenly given oxygen. Madison paused. She didn't turn. She didn't speak, but her eyes lowered just a fraction, a tiny movement nearly invisible, unless one looked closely, the only hint of a scar she had stitched shut hundreds of times in her life. Victoria moved closer, lifting her glass of red wine, her gaze icy, her lips curling like she was granting a lesson in social hierarchy. This area is for actual guests. Service staff enter through the other hallway, sweetheart. This time the laughter burst louder, cruder, unrestrained. Madison inhaled deeply, not from hurt, but from the fear that she might do something this room would never forget. She had heard lines like that her entire life, But never before had someone in front of hundreds of people in a multi-million-dollar gala under blinding crystal lights deliberately tried to turn her into entertainment. From above, the orchestra slipped again. A violinist dropped their bow, the small clatter echoing sharply. And Madison understood. This moment would change the night, perhaps someone's career, perhaps an entire empire. In the glittering light that fractured like breaking ice, she lifted her chin and continued her descent toward a storm that no one in the room realized they had summoned. Not her. Someone near the bar whispered, "Who is she?" But the more important and far more dangerous question hung unspoken in the air. Who is she really to walk down here without fear? They did not know. But within a few hours the entire world would, and the answer would shatter everything they believed they controlled. Madison felt it with absolute clarity, and she kept walking without trembling, without slowing, without lowering her gaze. Because tonight in that room, the person in power was not Victoria Hale. It was Madison Cole, the woman they had all misjudged the very moment they laid eyes on her. Victoria Hale did not wait for Madison to reach the marble floor before releasing a laugh, sharp enough to sound like shattering glass, a sound that made dozens of guests turn their heads without even needing to know what had happened. How adorable, Victoria, said her voice, stretched thin as if she were handling a cheap trinket. You actually dared to wear an emerald satin gown to a gala full of CEOs and chairwomen. Bold choice. Laughter rippled outward, like an underground current, growing from small clusters into a spreading wave. Madison remained still, her gaze fixed on the woman descending the last steps, with the poise of someone convinced she owned the entire room. Behind Victoria, wealthy guests, shimmering in haute couture, tilted their heads at Madison as if she were a visual error staining their evening. A man holding a wine glass muttered loud enough for multiple people to hear. Probably a backstage staff member who wandered out. Madison heard every word. Comments like these were nothing new, but the way they were spoken here, in a place where she should have been welcomed with respect, tightened her chest. Like a blade sliding across her skin, shallow enough not to kill her spirit, but sharp enough to hurt. Victoria stopped just a few steps away, her gaze sweeping from Madison's neatly pinned hair to the emerald dress finally landing on the silver bracelet on her wrist, a simple but elegant piece. "It is cute," Victoria said with a smile that held no humanity. "But the uniform for the buffet waitstaff is black, sweetheart. Did someone send you to the wrong floor?" The laughter burst open for real this time. The entire room seemed to crack under the chaotic mix of arrogance and indifference. Madison felt heat rising up her neck, but her expression never shifted. She had stood before entire panels of wealthy white men, been misnamed dozens of times, been told to wait outside for meetings she was funding, but never had she been humiliated in such a performative and public manner. Her eyes met the gazes of a few people standing by the window, people who looked uncomfortable or even slightly ashamed on her behalf, yet none of them spoke. No one dared stand against Victoria Hale, the woman Forbes once called the Queen of Silicon East. They owed her money, owed her contracts, or simply owed her their safety in the world they lived in. Victoria lifted her glass of red wine to eye level and swirled the ruby liquid as casually as if it were a prop in her personal show. "Come now, everyone," she said, her voice dripping with fake softness. "Let us raise a glass to this brave young lady for daring to—" She paused deliberately, letting everyone hang on her words. "Walk into a place that does not belong to her." Then, without waiting for any reaction, Victoria flicked her wrist. The flick was small, almost delicate, but the wine surged upward like blood from a fresh wound. The deep red liquid arced perfectly through the air and struck the bodice of Madison's satin gown. A chorus of gasps erupted. Some guests covered their mouths. Some laughed uncontrollably. Some live-streamed it without shame. And some stood frozen, not out of sympathy, but out of shock that Victoria dared to go so far. The wine seeped into the fabric like spreading veins of red, blooming into dark stains that marked the dress with violent humiliation. The emerald gown, chosen because it represented elegance without pretension, now bore a vivid wound that could not be erased. Victoria placed her glass onto a waiter's silver tray, her smile thin as a razor. "There now. You look much more suitable for your real role." Madison lowered her gaze to the stain, her hand resting lightly on the damp fabric, as if comforting her own body. But when she looked back up, her eyes were no longer the gentle lights they had been moments earlier. They had become two sharpened spears. The thought that crossed her mind was not anger, but something far more dangerous, a chilling clarity. She realized that Victoria Hale had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Those standing closest to Madison sensed the shift in the air. A young woman near a marble column whispered, "She does not look like someone who is going to run," but Victoria did not hear, or perhaps she refused to. "Security." She said, her voice soft as wind, but sharp as an execution order. Two men in black suits immediately began moving toward Madison. The space seemed to shrink. The air thickened. Even the breathing around them became cautious. Someone raised their phone higher. A man in a tuxedo whispered, "Oh no, this is going to make the news." But Madison remained still, straight, silent, unafraid. And that silence cast the entire room into a strange, heavy pause, like the stillness right before a storm crashes down. Someone suddenly realized, wait, she is not resisting. She is not scared. She is waiting for something. But Victoria saw only one thing, an opportunity to display her power. "Escort her out," she said, smiling coldly. "This gala is not for the lost or the misplaced." They all believed this would be a minor abuse of authority in the middle of an elite party, something no one would remember the next morning. But they didn't know that this act would not only destroy a gala, not only collapse a business deal, but would obliterate an entire empire built on Victoria's arrogance and illusion of power. Madison took a small step forward, not to leave but to brace herself. Her eyes never left Victoria. And in that moment, for the first time that night, a chill crawled up Victoria Hale's spine, one she did not understand. Because the storm she had summoned would not break Madison Cole. It would crash back and swallow Victoria completely in ways no one in that room was prepared to imagine. Madison gently placed her hand on her dress pocket. And in that exact moment, the entire Sterling Crown Gala had no idea they were only minutes away from watching history change direction, a direction Victoria Hale would wish she had never touched. The two security guards continued moving toward Madison under the expectant gaze of the crowd, each step echoing on the cold marble floor like a countdown to her final humiliation. Victoria stood with her arms crossed, her triumphant eyes narrowing the corner of her mouth, lifting as if she were moments away from savoring the perfect ending to the public spectacle she herself had orchestrated. People at the bar craned their necks to get a clearer view. A few lifted their phones to resume live streaming, their hands trembling with adrenaline. But Madison did not move. Her shoulders stayed straight, her gaze steady and deep like a dark ocean moments before a storm. It was not resistance. It was not fear. It was something deeper, quieter, far more dangerous. A man standing near the window swallowed hard. He did not know why, but every instinct in his body warned him that this was no longer just a cruel party joke. The guards were now only a few steps from Madison. The air thickened into something almost glass-like. Victoria raised her hand, as if signaling the grand finale of Madison's public disgrace. And then Madison slowly slipped her hand into her dress pocket. No one understood what she was doing. Some leaned in. Some held their breath. Some exchanged confused glances. In stark contrast, Victoria laughed. "Oh, are you trying to call customer service?" "No one here is going to help you, sweetheart." But her smile died instantly when Madison pulled out her phone, held it to her ear, and without trembling, without hesitation, without asking permission, spoke 2 words, clean and sharp as a blade, "Protocol Raven." The room froze. The 2 words were barely louder than a breath, but they cleaved through the tension hanging in the air like a drawn string. The security guards stopped immediately, their feet seeming to lock to the floor. One of them turned to the other, confusion clear in his eyes. They did not understand, but their training, shaped to recognize high-level threat codes, responded before their minds could catch up. Victoria squinted. "What did you just say?" Madison did not respond. She simply lowered the phone, pressed the button to end the call, and slipped it back into her pocket. The gesture was calm, almost casual, like she had simply notified her driver to bring the car around. But the people who understood the true meaning of that phrase reacted instantly. A man near the stage dropped his champagne glass. A woman by a marble pillar froze, clutching her collar. A young investor abruptly stepped back, his face turning pale as if slapped. They recognized it. They knew. And they were afraid. A voice cracked from the back of the room. "Oh my God, that's the internal code for the top-tier investment council." Another whisper floated out, barely audible. "Is she part of the Raven Circle? That's impossible." The Raven Circle, a group of 6. Just 6 individuals each, powerful enough to collapse a tech company's valuation with a single decision. And Madison Cole was one of them. Victoria felt a cold shock run down her spine, but she forced a brittle smile. "Stop pretending. This is my event. Security, go on." But the guards did not move. One bowed his head slightly, his voice cracking, "Ma'am, that code we cannot." "She is talking nonsense," Victoria snapped. "I am ordering your order," the guard said, quietly but firmly. "Cannot override a Raven protocol." Victoria's eyes twitched violently. Her face stiffened, the muscles pulling tight, as if frozen in place. The room became so silent that people could hear the faint clink of ice from the distant bar. Madison took a single deliberate step forward. Just one. Yet somehow the distance between them tightened, as though Madison were not approaching, but Victoria were being pushed back by something she could not see. "You believe," Madison said, her voice low, but edged so sharply that those closest felt goosebumps rise on their skin, "that you have the authority to decide who belongs here." Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Only the sound of her own shallow breaths and the frantic pounding of her heart. But I, Madison, continued her gaze, unwavering, am the one who decides whether your company survives until morning. The words were not a threat. They were fact. A fact born from the very power Victoria had just insulted, thinking she held the knife without realizing she had placed her own neck on it. Beyond the stage, people began whispering, If she triggered Raven Protocol, that $5.9 billion deal, Hale Tech could collapse overnight. The market will explode. Victoria swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control. Are you threatening me? Madison didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces of people who had laughed, streamed her humiliation, or watched her like entertainment. Now those same faces stared at her as if she were an untouchable force. Then Madison turned back to Victoria. No, I am warning you. A woman in the back gasped. My God, this is the biggest power shift I have ever seen. Madison placed her hand lightly on the red wine stain on her dress, a small motion, yet loaded with meaning, like marking the exact moment when humiliation transformed into her weapon. Then she spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the entire room. You just spilled the most expensive glass of wine of your life. Not a single laugh, not a single sound. Only Victoria Hale standing under the glittering chandeliers, suddenly small, suddenly fragile, as if the room itself were closing in on her. Because for the first time, she understood that Madison Cole had not come to this gala seeking acceptance. She had come to end a game one Victoria thought she controlled, but one for which she had always been standing in the wrong place. And when Madison tilted her head slightly, signaling the guards to step back, they obeyed instantly. The room exhaled as if released from a tightening grip. But Victoria did not. She remained frozen, her heart thundering painfully in her chest. Because somewhere deep in her instincts, she knew Madison Cole had just placed her hand on the door that would end the Hale Technologies empire. And that door was about to swing wide open. News from the luxurious Sterling Crown ballroom no longer stayed within its gold-plated walls, but instead ripped outward like a violent storm racing into the world faster than any market signal. It took less than 30 seconds for the first video clip, the moment Victoria hurled red wine onto the emerald gown, to appear on TikTok, and less than 2 minutes for the hashtag Gala disgrace to explode. The video, slightly shaky from the phone that captured it, showed the blinding crystal lights behind Madison forming a halo around her. The person filming even shouted over the noise. Oh my God, she didn't react at all. She just stood there. That exact moment, Madison's frozen, unyielding silence became the image that sent social media into a frenzy. Twitter ignited instantly, hundreds of tweets per second, flooding in like a bursting dam. Comments poured out, furious and breathless. Cannot believe it is the year 2025, and this still happens. Who is the woman in the green dress? I need her name. Now. Hale Tech is finished, mark my words. On Instagram, influencers reposted the clip with dramatic background music. Some edited the slow-motion splash of red wine, catching the light, making it look like a cinematic moment. A famous singer reshared the video with the caption, "This is why respect is the strongest currency." But what truly pushed the situation into a Category 5 social media storm was the second video, the one where Madison lifted her phone and said, "Protocol Raven." 2 words, but 2 words that sent the internet into a frenzy. A financial analysis account with more than 500,000 followers tweeted immediately, "Protocol Raven is a high-level investment signal." If she is really part of the Raven Circle, oh God, Hale Tech is done. Another user posted, when she said, "Protocol Raven, I swear I heard Victoria's soul leave her body." The entire internet shivered collectively, sensing the same power shift that the ballroom had felt moments earlier. One particular clip spread faster than all the others filmed from the opposite side of the stage. In it, Victoria was laughing, widely bathed in smug satisfaction, while behind her, a group of guests began to recognize Madison. In the background, a man whispered into his friend's ear, "Wait, I know her. I think that is Madison Cole. Madison Ravencircle. Madison!" No way. Victoria, oblivious, continued smiling. That is why the clip was captioned, "The only person who doesn't realize who is destroying her tonight is Victoria Hale herself." The clip hit 4 million views in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, silent chaos was spreading like an oil slick. Phones vibrated non-stop in pockets and clutches. Screens lit up beneath the crystal lights. Someone even opened Bloomberg right on the spot. A woman with long brunette hair whispered near the white sofa lounge, her voice trembling. Hale Tech stock just dropped 3% in the last 10 minutes. Her friend gasped. What immediately? Yes, and it is still falling. Messages from investors, crisis alerts from internal group chats and emergency calls flooded the devices of guests, suffocating the room with the kind of dread that sends a chill straight down the spine. A man in an expensive tuxedo stared at his screen and exhaled sharply. Novatech Systems just paused their entire funding deal with Hale Tech until further notice. That was the breaking point. As the guests stood frozen in disbelief, watching the situation escalate like wildfire, Victoria still had no idea what was truly unfolding. She could feel the shift in the room, how eyes no longer looked at Madison with mockery, but turned toward Victoria with confusion and rising fear. She snapped, "What is wrong with all of you? Don't let this little stunt ruin the night." But no one laughed. No one responded. No one stood with her. And in that moment, as Victoria looked around, seeking the familiar nods of affirmation, a silent pillar of power inside her began to crack. Suddenly her clutch vibrated. A notification. Victoria glanced down. A message from the chairman of Hale Tech's board. "We are in crisis. Call me immediately." Victoria froze. The board never sent messages during social events. Never. At the long table on the left side of the room, a man discreetly snapped a photo of Madison and sent it to his company group chat with the caption, "It really is Madison Cole." Oh God. Hale is done. Madison noticed the spreading chaos, but she remained still. Her eyes cold and unblinking, fixed on Victoria with a calmness that suffocated the entire room. She did not need to say anything. She did not need to explain. She did not need to threaten. Tonight, the world would do that for her. Outside the hotel, reporters had begun gathering, unaware of the specifics, but tipped off that something huge just happened at the Sterling Crown Gala. Cameras were set up. Lights were turned on, waiting. A young journalist looked at her phone and exclaimed, "Oh my God, this video, it is at 6 million views already." Inside the ballroom, a server walking past with a tray of wine glasses shook so badly the glasses clinked together. A guest leaned toward another and whispered, barely louder than a breath, "She isn't reacting because she doesn't have to. The greatest power is the power that does not need to speak." And from that moment, like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, everyone began to realize something terrifying. The red wine had not just stained satin fabric. It had ignited a collapse no one could put out. Victoria swallowed hard, looking around, and for the first time in years she felt truly alone. Completely alone. While millions of eyes across the world watched, waiting to witness the downfall of Hale Technologies in a way no one had ever seen before. And the most frightening part of all was this: everything had only just begun. Madison gently touched the red stain on her gown, her eyes cold and steady. No shouting. No threats. because now the world was doing the rest for her. The storm had risen, and its power no longer belonged to Victoria Hale, but to the silent force of Madison Cole. The atmosphere inside the Sterling Crown ballroom no longer resembled a gala, but the final judgment chamber of a collapsing empire. The orchestra had gone silent long ago, though no one in the room could recall when the music stopped, because the invisible chaos suffocating the space had drowned out every other sound. Everyone held their breath, each person sensing they were about to witness a moment that would rewrite corporate history, yet none dared to speak it aloud. Madison Cole stood at the center of the storm, the emerald satin gown soaked in red wine, now resembling battle armor, marked by an insult thrown at her in front of hundreds, but her eyes held no trace of hurt, only the sharpened resolve of a blade, freshly honed. Victoria Hale, in contrast, was unraveling. Outwardly she strained to maintain the last fragments of her authority, but inside every vein felt stretched tight with panic, her heartbeat pounding, wild sweat collecting in her palms, despite the cold air that forced servers to pull shawls tightly around their shoulders. When Madison had said, "Protocol, Raven," the outside world erupted. Now within this very ballroom, the aftershocks were tearing down each structural pillar of Hale Technologies in real time. On the right side of the room, an older businessman turned away from Victoria's gaze as his phone vibrated non-stop. He glanced at the screen messages from 3 investment funds all at once. "If the Raven Circle withdraws, we suspend all partnerships." His fingers tightened so hard the knuckles whitened. A fashion designer attending the gala let out a sharp breath when her assistant messaged her, "Hale Tech stock is down 8% in 20 minutes. Early signs of a crash." She looked at Victoria with a mixture of pity and horror, knowing full well one truth: the market never waits for someone to salvage their dignity before delivering punishment. Near the stage, several musicians had abandoned their instruments to watch. One violinist, his walnut wood instrument still in his hand, stared at his phone and muttered, "They are saying on Reddit, this could be the fastest collapse of the decade." Dear God. People began subtly shifting away from Victoria, as if her presence were a ticking explosive. The air was so heavy that even taking a deep breath felt extravagant. Victoria clung to the fragile hope that this was merely a passing viral moment. She lifted her chin, inhaled deeply, and forced a brittle laugh. "All right, the joke ends here. Someone, please." But her sentence was sliced in half by a sharp sound, the live commentary of the market. A young man, likely a financial analyst, stared at the glowing phone in his hand. His eyes widened, his voice cracking. "My God, Hale Tech just lost $900 million in market value in 27 minutes. Victoria's vision blurred. Her legs trembled, as though ready to fold. She turned toward Madison, grasping for authority. You cannot cause this." "You do not understand the consequences." Madison said nothing, but the silence itself made Victoria's voice quiver. Because in that silence, Victoria finally understood. Madison didn't need to speak to cause consequences. She was the consequence. Then the ballroom doors creaked open. An event manager rushed in, pale-faced, carrying a small corded phone linked to the backstage control room. "Ms. Hale, the board is on the line. They say it is urgent." The entire ballroom turned. Victoria's hands shook as she took the phone, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Hello." The voice on the other end was cold as steel. "Victoria, what you just did has spread across the entire market. We have lost billions in 20 minutes. Novatech has withdrawn. 3 strategic partners are holding emergency meetings. The media is demanding answers. If Madison Cole pulls out of the agreement, we will collapse." Victoria stammered. "This is just a misunderstanding. I will apologize." "It is not about an apology," the chairman snapped his voice, cutting like a blade. "This is about the fact that you publicly humiliated one of the most powerful women in investment. You disgraced a member of the Raven Circle. What exactly makes you think they will let us walk away from this?" Victoria went speechless. The Raven Circle 6 investors powerful enough to move the entire market with a few signatures. Madison had never flaunted her position, but Victoria, in her arrogance, had torn the veil off and walked straight into the jaws of the beast. And now she understood the beast was not Madison. It was the market. The chairman continued his voice even colder. "Prepare yourself. If Madison Cole issues a statement tonight, Hale Tech could lose over $3 billion before dawn." Victoria whispered, trembling. "Then what do you want me to do?" "We want you to understand," the chairman replied slowly, "that even if you kneel in front of Madison right now, the market will not forgive you." The phone slipped from Victoria's fingers, her hands numb with cold. She looked around and saw people avoiding her eyes, saw the terrifying silence consuming her voice. Madison still stood there quiet, but the force radiating from her crashed against the marble walls like unseen waves. In that moment, Victoria felt something she had never known before: powerlessness. And that powerlessness terrified her more than any threat. She took several shaky steps toward Madison. "Madison, I think we can negotiate." Madison met her eyes, and there was no hatred, no rage. Only one thing: judgment. Judgment of whether Victoria was even worthy of hearing her next words. Then Madison spoke the sentence the entire ballroom had been waiting for. The sentence Victoria had feared since the splash of red wine burst across satin. "I have not decided yet," Madison said, her voice steady. "But I can guarantee one thing: the consequences of tonight will not stay within this room." The crowd shuddered. Victoria staggered. And in that moment, everyone understood tonight was not a scandal. Tonight was the beginning of a collapse. A collapse. Victoria had ignited herself, while Madison only needed to stand still and let the world turn. The storm was coming, and it carried a single name: Madison Cole. The air inside the Sterling Crown ballroom no longer felt like a gala, but like a cavern filled with shallow breaths and fear threading through every pair of eyes. Guests who had arrived expecting wine and music now stood clustered in tight groups, gripping their champagne flutes so firmly they barely remembered to drink their gazes, flicking repeatedly toward Madison, as though she had become the center of a newly formed gravitational field. Whispers sliced through the air like wind, pushing through a narrow crack. What is she going to do? Is she going to pull the deal? Hale Tech is finished. And then there was Victoria. Hale, the hostess of the Gala, the woman who once stood at the peak of her own arrogance, now trembling inside the very space she had crafted. Her face drained of color, her eyes shimmering with rising tears. She fought desperately to suppress, as if a single tear would shatter what was left of her fragile composure. Madison Victoria's voice rasped like dry leaves scraping across stone. I admit I behaved terribly. I am willing to apologize right here in front of everyone." A few guests gasped. For the first time in her career, Victoria Hale bowed her head. But Madison did not answer immediately. She shifted slightly, as though simply adjusting her stance to study more clearly the woman who had once treated her like decoration in her own party. The spotlight reflected off the red wine stain spreading across Madison's gown, making it look like a wound still fresh, and in that glow she resembled a warrior who had just walked out of a battle in which the attacker now stood, trembling before her. An apology, Madison asked. Her voice was not loud, but each word struck the air as if it had weight. "Do you think an apology can undo what happened tonight?" Victoria swallowed hard. I want to fix this. I will release a statement. I will. You will what?" Madison stepped forward. Instinctively, the entire room seemed to step back. "You will say the spilled wine was an accident. You will say you didn't mean to discriminate. Or perhaps you will say I misunderstood." Each sentence pierced through the veneer of Victoria's former authority like needles. She trembled more violently. But Madison raised her hand, halting her. "I have heard apologies like that my whole life." She said her tone not angry, but coldly precise, and they are always empty. Apologies spoken only when someone is forced to speak them have never been real apologies. A ripple of murmurs spread through the ballroom like a small quake. People were beginning to understand Madison had not come for an apology. She had come for truth. An older man in a grey suit leaned toward his companion and whispered, "She is about to make the announcement." Victoria felt as though she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Whatever Madison said next would determine whether she fell. She could not bear it any more. Victoria stepped forward, reaching instinctively the way a drowning woman grasps at anything that floats. "Madison, please let me make this right. I can know." Madison's answer came instantly sharp as a snapped thread. One word, but it dropped like a death sentence. Victoria froze, eyes wide. "No, yes," Madison replied. "No." Her voice was not raised, yet it carried farther than any music ever played in that ballroom. "Not because I hate you," she continued, her eyes showing no anger, only truth that shined like a spotlight, "but because you do not understand that tonight was not just about you insulting me. You insulted every person who has ever been dismissed, ever been told they were in the wrong room, ever been humiliated, even when they had every right to stand in any room they entered." Victoria trembled like a leaf about to be torn from its branch in a storm. "Madison, please my company, thousands of employees." The first tears finally fell. But Madison didn't waver. She had endured too much to be moved by the late tears of the woman who had thrown an entire glass of humiliation across her dress. "You must have thought," Madison said slowly, her voice honed to a cutting edge, "that I came to this gala to play by your rules." She lifted her chin and looked directly at Victoria. "But I never play by anyone's rules." Then Madison turned and walked toward the gold-plated podium at the center of the ballroom, the podium Victoria had planned to use to unveil Hale Tech's newest project. Every step Madison took echoed like the approach of a verdict. When she laid her hand on the podium, the entire room held its breath. The spotlight automatically shifted onto her, and for the first time that night, she became the true focal point. Not because of the dress, not because of the scandal, but because of the sheer force of power radiating from the words she was about to speak. "I know everyone in this room has been watching the $5.9 billion deal, Madison," began her voice, calm, but ringing through every corner. The entire ballroom fell into absolute silence. Tonight I witnessed arrogance, disguised as culture insults, turned into entertainment, and the silence of those who should have known right from wrong. Her gaze swept across the room. Many looked down, unable to meet her eyes. And because of that, Madison continued, her eyes sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath I will not allow any agreement to be signed under the shadow of such contempt." A woman covered her mouth as she whispered, "She is about to." Madison inhaled slowly, not from nerves but from the weight of a moment she knew would be studied in business schools, market analyses, and even dinner-table conversations for years to come. "I," she said, slow and unshakable, "have made my decision." Victoria stumbled, nearly collapsing. Madison looked directly at the CEO who had once treated her as someone beneath her. Her eyes held no rage, only judgment. "And that decision," Madison said, her voice dropping like the final locking of a vault, "will be announced the moment I step out of this room." Audible gasps rippled across the ballroom, as if the entire crowd had been pulled into the same collapsing vacuum. Victoria whispered, "Shattered, Madison, please don't." But Madison turned away, offering her no further glance. Because in that moment, the entire world could see with brutal clarity Victoria Hale no longer had the right to plead. And Madison Cole, standing alone beneath the lights, now held not just the fate of a deal, but the entire future of Hale Technologies. No verdict needed to be spoken aloud, because everyone understood the moment Madison walked out of that room, history would shift and Hale Tech would plunge into freefall with no brakes. The doors of the Sterling Crown ballroom swung open as Madison Cole stepped out, and that moment was like the first crack in what had once seemed an unbreakable fortress surrounding Hale Technologies. The hallway outside was flooded with flashing lights from reporters, a wave of noise crashing forward like a silver tide. But Madison did not slow down, did not look around, and did not waver. She walked as if the ground itself moved aside for her, the woman who, an hour earlier, had been mistaken for a staff worker, now the person who could determine the fate of $1 billion empire. Reporters pushed forward microphones, stretching toward her like sharpened spears. "Madison, are you really pulling out of the deal? Did you activate Raven Protocol to freeze the entire transaction?" Has Victoria Hale apologized yet? Madison did not answer. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting all the chaos erupting behind her. The quieter she was, the more dangerous she became. The quieter she was, the more the world leaned in to hear her next breath. Inside the ballroom, Victoria Hale still stood, frozen like a soul forcibly torn from its body. A few guests moved toward her, as if to offer comfort, but stopped when they saw the empty, hollow look in her eyes, the look of someone facing a truth she had spent her whole life avoiding. Her power had never been hers. It had been borrowed from the market, from partners, from reputation, and now all of it was turning its back on her. While Victoria struggled to steady her breathing, a storm of new notifications flooded her phone so rapidly that the screen glowed like a flickering beacon. Novatech officially withdraws. 2 investment funds halt all capital flow. Bloomberg headline, Hale Tech in freefall after Gala incident. CNN requesting immediate interview. Victoria tried to fling the phone away as if it were venomous, but her hands shook so badly that it simply slipped and fell to the floor, rolling until it stopped at the feet of a guest staring at her, the way one stares at the ruins of a monument that has just imploded. Across the room, staff began drawing the curtains and quietly clearing trays of untouched wine, but everyone knew no one cared about the gala anymore. No one would remember the truffle hors d'oeuvres, the orchestra, or the celebrities in attendance. Tonight, the brightest spark was the fire consuming Victoria Hale's legacy. In the hallway, Madison walked toward the elevator, with steady, measured steps, each one sounding like a hammer, striking the coffin of Hale Technologies. Just before the elevator doors closed, a young reporter managed to step forward and ask in a trembling voice, "Madison, do you regret what you're about to do?" Madison looked at the girl for exactly 1 second. 1 second was enough to make the reporter swallow hard. Then Madison answered, "The only thing I regret is believing respect could exist in that room." The elevator doors slid shut. Everyone who heard that sentence held their breath, because they understood it was not an emotional remark. It was a declaration, and that declaration would rattle Wall Street. As the elevator descended, social media continued to explode like a wildfire. The clip of Madison saying, "I have not decided, but the consequences will not stay in that room," had reached 20 million views in under an hour. A financial account tweeted, "If Madison Cole walks away, Hale Tech could lose 40% of its market value tonight." Another wrote, "This is no longer a scandal. This is a historical lesson." At the Hale Tech headquarters, a few blocks away, every floor was lit brightly, the entire tower glowing like a sinking ship, blasting its final distress signals. In the main conference room, senior executives crowded around the huge screen displaying the stock chart, plunging like a falling boulder. Down 11%, 12%, 14%. The CFO slammed his hand on the table, his voice breaking, "Good God, in 30 years I have never seen a drop this fast." Another executive barked, "We need to persuade Madison, call her, send a representative, do anything." It's useless, the chief legal officer cut in his tone as cold as ash. "The Raven Circle will not interfere." Madison has the final say. Silence swallowed the room. Not the silence of analysis, but the silence of despair. On the 3rd floor of the hotel, Victoria stumbled out onto the balcony, gripping the railing, like someone imagining the cliff collapsing beneath her feet. She looked down at the glowing Manhattan streets, but saw nothing except fear. She whispered words she never imagined she would say. Did I destroy everything myself? A voice behind her made her jump. Stephen Moore, the CFO of Hale Tech, once her most loyal supporter, stood there. But now the look he gave her held no respect. Only cold truth. "Victoria," he said slowly, "the company is collapsing. Madison hasn't even made a statement. Just one move from her was enough for the market to burn every ounce of trust we had left." Victoria turned eyes red and wet. "Stephen, what am I supposed to do?" He looked at her for a long moment, drew a deep breath, and said something that seemed to slice the air in half. "What you need to do, Victoria, is no longer about protecting the company." Victoria trembled. "Then what is it?" Stephen's voice was steel. "It is preparing to step out of your chair." The words cut through the night, and Victoria collapsed against the railing as if her legs could no longer bear her weight. The CEO, who had once thrown wine into another woman's face, now looked like a wilted flower tossed into a storm. Downstairs, the elevator doors opened, and Madison stepped into the grand lobby. Every hotel employee stood still silent as statues. A young receptionist looked at Madison with pure respect, not respect for her title, but for the fact that she had proven something many people only dream of, that dignity could bring a corporation to its knees. As Madison passed, the young woman whispered, soft enough for only Madison to hear, "Thank you for standing up for everyone who was ever looked down on." Madison paused for 1 second. She did not turn around, but her voice rang like polished steel. Not standing up, not bowing down. Then she continued walking, leaving behind a sacred silence that settled over the hotel. That night, as Madison stepped out into the cold Manhattan wind, the gusts felt less like a challenge and more like a salute. Because she understood leaving that ballroom was not merely her decision. It was the beginning of a collapse that would become a warning for an entire generation of leaders. And no matter how desperately Victoria Hale tried to hold on, she could not stop it. The wheel of justice had already begun rolling, and the person who pushed it was Madison Cole. The moment Madison Cole left the Sterling Crown Gala, the news detonated like a fuse touching flame, and by the time her heels touched the top step outside the hotel lobby, her assistant rushed toward her and whispered, "Madison, we need to release a statement immediately. The market is in chaos. The legal team is waiting for your command." Madison did not answer right away. Instead, she lifted her eyes to the Manhattan night sky, the glowing lights stretching like golden veins across a field of darkness. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, as if the city itself were holding still, waiting for her decision. A decision that would affect not only Hale Tech, but the thousands of employees behind it. The global tech market, and all the people watching this unravel with the hope that for the first time, the one who was underestimated would not be forced to bow. Across the street, dozens of reporters lined up their microphones, aimed at her like a volley of drawn arrows. Cameras switched on, every light flashing like an eager eye. Madison kept walking each step of her heels, striking the stone with steady, unwavering rhythm. When she finally stopped within the circle of press, the whole of Manhattan seemed to fall silent. Ms. Cole, a male reporter, shouted, his voice stretched tight. "The $5.9 billion deal with Hale Tech. Have you cancelled it?" A female reporter pushed forward. "Can you confirm activating Protocol Raven to freeze the transaction?" Another voice rose. Victoria Hale just stated, "This was all a misunderstanding. Do you accept her apology?" Madison looked at them, her eyes calm as a midnight lake. She did not rush to speak. She was not driven by panic nor fear, the very two things swallowing Hale Tech alive at that moment. Before she could answer, her phone vibrated lightly in her hand. A notification popped up: Hale Tech stock, down 21.4%. Another message from the analytics team: Novatech Systems officially confirms withdrawal. A third: 3 financial institutions request to meet Madison within 12 hours. She locked her screen, her expression unchanged. Then she spoke her voice, not loud, but clear as a bronze bell ringing in the night. "I will say exactly 3 things." The crowd leaned in. First, she said, "I do not take apologies lightly. But an apology must come before the insult, not after the entire world witnesses it." Some reporters nodded, as if she had spoken the truth they themselves had felt, but never dared to articulate. Second, Madison continued her tone, dipping into a deeper steadiness. Protocol Raven is not used for retaliation. It exists to protect transactional integrity. And tonight, that integrity was shattered. The crowd murmured. A reporter whispered, "She's about to end it." And third, Madison paused, staring directly into the rows of cameras. The $5.9 billion agreement between Cole and Finch Capital and Hale Technologies. From this moment, every reporter held their breath. "Is officially terminated." The rapid-fire clicking of cameras sounded like hailstorm against glass. Onlookers gasped, some swearing aloud from sheer shock. A female reporter dropped to her knees, stunned. Another nearly yelled, "Hale Tech is going to collapse." This has never happened in history, but Madison remained unmoved amid the storm. She continued, "No company can build its future on contempt. No leader deserves their position. if they treat another person's dignity and pride as entertainment. The wind swept down Fifth Avenue, carrying scraps of press papers as if the city itself were agreeing with her. This is not a lesson for Hale Technologies alone. Madison said, her gaze locked on the camera lenses, as though she were looking directly into the eyes of millions around the world. It is a lesson for any system that believes it can exist without respecting the people who sustain it. As she finished, reporters thrust microphones toward her, but Madison gently shook her head. The statement is clear. I have nothing further to add. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the press corps in a frenzy unlike anything they had ever experienced. But the true earthquake was not happening at the hotel. It was happening inside the glass towers of Manhattan, where people in tailored suits were holding their breath as the stock charts bled red. On the 47th floor of Hale Tech, the emergency meeting room felt like an operating theater, watching a patient die second by second. She announced it. The CFO shouted, slamming his hand against the table. Why did no one stop her? The head of legal trembled. Stop her how? The authority is hers. We have no grounds to oppose. A marketing director broke down, crying. We have lost everything. Everything. The chairman of the board leaned against the wall, his face ash grey, his voice hollow. Victoria, you have destroyed us. When Victoria heard the words officially cancelled, her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, covering her face with both hands, a small choking sob escaping her like the cry of a trapped animal. An assistant standing nearby hesitated, torn between helping her or fleeing. Victoria kept whispering over and over, No, she can't. She can't. But Madison already had, and the market was answering with fury. 10 minutes after her announcement, Hale Tech plunged 29%. Investment funds withdrew en masse. Internal trading systems froze. 3 banks locked all credit lines. Tech forums erupted. This is the fastest crash in Hale Tech history. Victoria destroyed her own empire. Madison Cole is the symbol of modern dignity. At Cole and Finch Capital, the communications team was no calmer. Madison. Millions of posts are mentioning you. The viral rate is unprecedented. We have interview requests from 17 countries. Madison answered calmly. Decline them all. I have nothing more to say. But this is an opportunity, her assistant protested. Madison cut her off. I did not do this to be celebrated. I did it for respect. She stood before the large glass window, overlooking the glowing city. Her eyes held no pride, no thrill of victory, only the exhausted stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime proving her worth in rooms that never wanted her there. That night, while every headline revolved around the fall of Hale Technologies, Madison switched off her phone, shut down social media, silenced every noise. She entered her quiet apartment, removed her heels, set the emerald gown with its dried wine stain gently over a chair. And before showering, resting, or doing anything else, she stood in the darkness, with her hand resting over the place where the red stain had spread, and closed her eyes for 1 second. Not to remember the night, but to make herself a promise. From now on, every room I walk into, no one will ever ask whether I belong there. And that promise, just like the announcement she made, would become a tidal wave across the corporate world. Because when an empire collapses, a new standard rises. And that standard carries a name: Madison Cole. The shockwave Madison unleashed did not end on the night of her announcement. It rippled through the following hours like an unending aftershock, tearing apart the already rotting foundations of Hale Technologies. By early morning, Before sunlight had even touched the glass towers of Manhattan, national television was already running a red headline banner, "Hail Tech," in uncontrollable plunge after investor Madison Cole's declaration. At Hail Tech headquarters, employee badges beeped frantically against the scanners as staff rushed in with panic written across their faces. The atmosphere was stretched tight like a balloon ready to explode. Heated arguments broke out right in the hallway. She really cancelled the deal. How are we supposed to save the company? Now, why didn't Victoria apologize the moment it happened? Some who had once been loyal to Victoria lashed out blindly. She is just an investor. How did everything start revolving around her? But even they knew deep down, no one at Hail Tech had the right to ask that question. Madison was not just an investor. She was the single pillar holding up the company's most critical deal. And now that the pillar had been pulled out, the entire tower of arrogance was collapsing onto those who once believed themselves untouchable. On the 47th floor inside the executive boardroom, the air was dense and heavy, like ash settling after an explosion. Senior directors took turns reporting. Stock down 37% pre-market. Banks have cut all credit limits. 3 strategic partners have withdrawn entirely. Another voice trembled. Retail investors are dumping shares. Reddit is in chaos. Twitter is calling for a boycott. Instagram is flooded with clips from the Gala. On the large screen, the red chart plunged straight downward, like a blade stabbing the heart of everyone in the room. Panting breaths, pens dropping, and chairs scraping filled the space with despair. Then the door opened. Victoria Hale entered. But she was no longer the powerful CEO who used to stride across tech stages with a confident smile. This was a shattered version of her pale-faced, red-eyed, hair-disheveled body, trembling as though each breath cost her strength she no longer had. As she opened her mouth, a dry, stern voice cut through the room. "Victoria, sit down." It was the chairman of the board. No respect, no courtesy, only command. Victoria had no choice. She sat, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened, as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of her dignity. The chairman stood, pressing his hand against the table, his voice heavy as a sentence being delivered. Since last night, Hail Tech has lost more than 41% of its market value. Projections show it will reach a 55% drop today. And all of it began with your lack of control, your lack of professionalism, your lack of ethics. Victoria opened her mouth. I didn't mean to." "We do not need to hear it," another director said coldly. "The video shows everything clearly. The world has watched. Investors have judged. No explanation can save you." Every pair of eyes stabbed into Victoria like a blade. No one stood with her. Not one. She stammered. "But I can still talk to Madison if she would just see me." The chairman let out a dry laugh. "Madison has no need to see you. She already made her decision, and the entire world has heard it." A folder slid across the table toward Victoria. Inside was the formal document demanding her resignation, drafted at 3 a.m. "The board has reached a unanimous decision," the chairman said, unmoved by the way Victoria was shaking. "You will step down as CEO, effective immediately." Victoria choked. Her fingers touched the edge of the document, trembling so violently that the paper shook. You cannot do this to me." "No." The chairman said, "You did this to the company." When she still refused to sign, he added, "If you decline, we will hold a public vote of removal in the emergency meeting at 10 o'clock. The press is already waiting outside." That was the final blow. Victoria looked around the room, searching desperately for a sympathetic face, but everyone turned away. She understood no one in that room intended to be buried with her. And then she signed. The signature shook and twisted like a jagged line, slashing through 20 years of career and the illusion of power she once thought would last a lifetime. When the pen left the page, the entire room exhaled as though an infection had just been contained. Victoria stood stepping back as though the cold floor were draining the last of her strength. No goodbye, no escort. No one even looked at her again. She walked out of the boardroom like an empty shadow, her heels tapping hollowly behind her, as if accounting every mistake she had ever made. The door closed behind her with a final thud echoing in her mind like the lid of a coffin. Meanwhile, across the global corporate world from Silicon Valley to Singapore, leadership teams were holding emergency meetings analyzing the Madison effect. Headlines flooded every major outlet. The fall of Hale Tech proves respect is not just morality, it is capital. One glass of red wine and a $5.9 billion lesson. Madison Cole, the woman redefining the power metric. Across the city, Madison sat alone inside the glass conference room of Cole and Finch Capital, reviewing the live market report, trembling upward, with updates every minute. But her eyes held no triumph, no satisfaction, only the solemn quiet of someone who understood her decision last night had never been about revenge. It had been about truth. Any system built on contempt will collapse the moment light shines on it. And last night, she simply happened to be the one who flipped the switch. Dawn rose over Manhattan, but it could not wash away the tension hanging in the air. And while most of America was still sipping its first cup of coffee, the story of Hale Technologies' collapse had already climbed to the #1 spot on every financial news site, every social platform, and even the internal bulletins of major corporations worldwide. All of them spoke about one person, Madison Cole. At the Cole and Finch Capital office, where sunlight reflected through towering glass panels, Madison sat at her desk with an expression that did not resemble someone who had just shaken the entire market. There was no pride, no thrill of victory, only the sharp stillness of someone who understood that the storm from the night before had not struck at one individual, but at the entire system that had allowed arrogance, like Victoria Hale's, to thrive for far too long. Her assistant stepped in, looking overwhelmed. "Madison, we have more than 40 global interview requests. CNN, BBC, the Financial Times, Fox Business, CNBC. They all want you live." Madison simply replied, "Decline them all. No further comments." The assistant nodded, unable to hide a mixture of admiration and disbelief. This moment could have catapulted Madison into public legend, yet she chose silence just as she had the previous night. And it was that very silence that made her more formidable than any speech ever could. Across the city, news stations replayed the moment Madison walked out of the ballroom. A CNN editor exclaimed on live television, "You cannot help but respect a woman who stands alone before power and does not bow." A Bloomberg analyst said in an interview, "What Madison did was not destruction. It was her reminding the market that respect is also a form of capital." But the loudest echo came from the online community. People who had been discriminated against, dismissed, misidentified, or belittled, now looked to Madison as a new flame cutting through an old darkness. Social media overflowed with messages, "Thank you, Madison, for doing what we could not." She did not speak only for herself, but for millions. This is the first time I have seen justice inside a luxury ballroom. In a Brooklyn cafe, a group of business students debated intensely, fingers swiping across an iPad showing the viral clip. She redefined leadership standards. No, she changed the entire rule book. I want to learn how she stood still, yet overpowered the whole room. Meanwhile, in corporate boardrooms across the nation, leaders tried to hide their unease as employees looked at them with new eyes. The eyes of people who had now witnessed that power can collapse, not because of the market, but because of a single act of disrespect. No one wanted to become the next Victoria Hale. As for Victoria, once Hale Tech officially announced her removal as CEO, she left the building through a side exit, avoiding the dozens of reporters waiting in the main lobby. Her eyes were empty, her face pale, her coat hanging too loosely, as if her entire being had shrunk. When a journalist captured a photo of her entering a car, the image spread instantly with the caption, "Arrogance always has a price." But while the world watched Victoria's downfall, Madison was preparing for something far bigger. That afternoon, she held a private meeting with her strategy team. Faces tense, they waited for her guidance. Madison turned on the projector, displaying a draft titled Dignity Equity Initiative. A business director blinked in surprise. "Madison, what do you want to do with this fund?" Madison answered slowly. "I want to use it to support the people who will never get the chance to stand in a ballroom and speak the truth." The room fell silent. Madison continued, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It took me 20 years to be heard. Some people will never get that chance. I want to change that." Someone asked, "Do you think the world will welcome this?" Madison gave a faint smile, a smile that carried the weight of the gala night. "I am not doing this to be welcomed. I'm doing it because it is right." As the team sat in stunned quiet, Madison added, "And I want this initiative to expand globally. Respect has no borders." In that moment, everyone understood that Madison was not merely ending a prideful empire. She was building a new standard. Meanwhile, governments around the world began drafting new policies. In Washington, a senator declared, "Hale Tech is proof that toxic corporate culture is an economic threat." In Brussels, the European Commission proposed evaluating a Madison clause requiring companies to prove respectful, non-discriminatory workplaces before signing major contracts. In Tokyo, large corporations issued internal statements. All leaders must attend conduct and cultural training immediately. A reform wave had begun. But everyone understood that wave did not begin with Hale Tech. It began with the moment a woman stood in a ballroom soaked in red wine and refused to bow. That night, when Madison returned home, she opened her apartment door, turned on a small lamp and sat on the sofa. A deep exhaustion washed over her, not the exhaustion of battle, but of the weight of the change she had set into motion. She glanced at the emerald gown freshly cleaned, except for a faint shadow of the stain, like a memory clinging to fabric. And Madison realized that the gala did not define her. She had defined the gala. In the reflection on the glass door, she whispered softly a promise to herself. It was not my power that made them change. It was the truth. Then she closed her eyes for one steady breath and understood that beginning tomorrow, the world would not only witness the collapse of Hale Tech, it would witness something else, rising, a legacy, a standard, a reminder that a real power does not sit on a throne, but stands tall when someone tries to diminish it. And that legacy, carrying the name Madison Cole, would echo for generations. From the perspective of a specialist in power dynamics and corporate governance, Madison Cole's story reveals a truth we cannot overlook, that great empires do not collapse because of small mistakes, but because their core values had already decayed long before. And in contrast, the rebirth of any system never comes from grand excuses, but from individuals who dare to say enough, who dare to place dignity above profit, and who dare to walk out of the rooms where they were dismissed in order to build new rules. Madison did not seek revenge, she reset the standard. She did not need to shout, she used silence and principle. If this story resonates with you, like to help spread the message about the value of respect, and subscribe to follow more journeys of uncovering healing and rebuilding like this. And finally, leave a comment with the phrase "honor dignity" to remind each other that some things should never be compromised.